Most people would agree that Streets of Rage 2 is not only absolutely amazing, but one of the defining video games of the early 90s. When it came to beat 'em ups on home consoles, this title had it all and would not just keep players coming back to it week after week for new play sessions, but decades after decades. This one is just that beloved. Everything about this entry screams classic, with it now today existing in many people's minds as one of the most special games they have ever experienced in a lifetime. So with that said, join me today as we further attempt to understand this thought track and try to break down why some people not only believe this to be the greatest brawler ever made, but the best Mega Drive game and Sega produced game overall too. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is Streets of Rage 2, the absolute GOAT. Yeah! In August of 1991, the video game landscape would be forever changed when Sega released the first ever Streets of Rage game. This iconic game was created using the same engine as the legendary Golden Axe, but was reimagined to look and play similarly to the smash hit Final Fight. The decision was made to go in this direction due to the fact that Final Fight was a hugely popular arcade game and would later debut on the Super Nintendo as a console exclusive. Sega would ensure that their city-centric brawler was superior to Final Fight's home port on the SNES, with the most significant factor being that Sega's Streets of Rage featured two-player cooperative play, whereas Final Fight on the Super Nintendo left out this quintessential feature. For this reason, Streets of Rage was successful in bringing a true beat-em-up arcade experience home, whereas Final Fight was just yet another regular single-player console experience that lacks in quality to its arcade counterpart. The first Streets of Rage was great, instantly becoming not only one of the best games available on the Sega Mega Drive, but also one of the greatest console games to exist. Full stop. At its point of release, the game was by far the most advanced cooperative belt scroller which could be enjoyed at home. The fact that it existed was a justifiable reason to want to own the 16-bit Sega hardware over that of the competition. Known as Ben Nakaru in Japan, the first game was such a smash hit in the West that developing a sequel was simply a no-brainer. When it came to the undertaking of such a task, Sega were keen to create this game as quickly as possible. This was seen as key at the time in order to continue to rapidly expand the Genesis' system library and remain competitive against Nintendo. Keeping all of this in mind, Sega aimed to have such a title released before Christmas of 1992 in North America, just over a year after the original game debuted on the platform. Achieving this would be far from easy, therefore Sega would pull in a lot of outside help and would opt to recruit several development teams to work with them. Duties would be performed on an ad hoc basis to get this huge game out in time for the festive period. As plans for this game were rolled out, some of the game's programming, planning and graphic design were outsourced to a company known as Shout Design Works. This studio was newly established in 1992 by Akishi Imai, a dot artist who had previously worked at Atlus. In fact, some of the game's main programming and system design can both be credited to Shout. Building on the collaborative effort that was undertaken to make this game possible, M&M Software was also tasked to work on the title. They took on planning aspects in the development of the game and were given the responsibility of handling a sound driver. M&M stands for this, which translates to everyone making money together harmoniously, an ethic that company founder Makoto Ichikawa stood by. On the subject of this inspirational individual, he is notable for challenging the status quo regarding the dreadful work-life balance faced by many workers living in Japan. Upset with Japanese working culture, he would found his own company promoting different values, stating, "I had seen people take credit for other people's hard work. Not only that, I had witnessed several deaths from overwork. Managers took advantage of shy and modest programmers. They would pick some programmers as lead, and these programmers would work so hard, thinking we were chosen, we must work hard. They would eventually burn out. Sometimes the worst awaited them. I thought this was very wrong, but these things were allowed to happen without anyone even questioning the situation. I decided to start my own company where I wouldn't allow such things to happen." Sadly, as we know, the negative aspect of Japanese working culture still persists to this day, contributing to the country having one of the highest suicide rates in the world. However, it is nice to know that some individuals at least, including those who worked on Streets of Rage 2, have been recognising and trying to tackle these issues for quite some time. Yet another reason to love the legendary game. Speaking of legendary games, isn't it fantastic that now over 30 years on from Streets of Rage 2, it's still inspiring an entire new generation of high quality beat 'em ups. And do you know what's even better? I can get you up to 90% off many of these, as well as many other AAA games too. To get loads of bargains and support this channel simultaneously, use my affiliate link via the pinned comments. Happy shopping! Elsewhere on the project, demo programming and some of the enemy sprite work were carried out by a group known as HIC, but the most legendary entity who would be involved with the creation of this game were of course Ancient. You know, the company founded by iconic composer Yuzo Koshiro along with his mother and sister, that would include many of the masterminds behind the first game. Ancient took on some of the largest aspects of Streets of Rage 2's development. This included further game planning, the game's main design, including the background objects and many of the game's characters. On their side of things, Ancient also created the game's legendary composition and sound effects under the leadership of Yuzo Koshiro, with 3 contributions from Motohiro Kawashima, another now legendary video game composer in his own right. Keeping track of everything we have covered so far, I hope the picture is beginning to come clear to you that the development of Streets of Rage 2 was a huge undertaking and was an impressive collaborative effort between 4 different development studios and of course Sega, who were overseeing the entire project. The game was made with the intention to be bigger and better than any Mega Drive game that had been made before it. All of this was only made possible due to the hard work of the programmers involved, who would work tirelessly improving the Mega Drive cartridge specification. This allowed the Streets of Rage 2 team to add more features and additional memory cache by creating 16 megabyte carts. This would allow for the literally biggest Mega Drive game ever produced. Fortunately for everyone involved, all these efforts would hugely pay off, since the game became both a commercial and critical success. In fact, history now shows us that many perceive the game to be not just the best entry in the series, but the best game in the beat 'em up genre, and one of the greatest video games of all time period. The game is simply that damn good. There is just so much to love about this one, which is made all the more clear the more we begin to look at the extent of the resources that will be poured into crafting this one. We will cover more on this game's development in a moment, but first let's turn our attention to this game's magnificent story and characters. Mirroring the real well between releases in the game's story, 1 year has passed since the events of the first game and the defeat of Mr. X and his dastardly criminal organisation. However, all is not as peaceful as it seems. One day, Blaze receives a phone call from the affable Skate, the younger brother of Adam, one of the playable characters from the previous game. Skate provides us with the revelation that Mr. X is back and has not only maniacally kidnapped Adam, but has retaken the streets too. This simple to digest story instantly establishes the game's narrative, giving a solid reason to put the player back on the streets in an opportunity to fight through waves of enemies all over again, but this time with stakes higher than ever before. For those going into this one straight off the back of the previous experience, for the most part Streets of Rage 2 goal-wise remains largely unchanged from its predecessor. However, there are some notable changes that set this game apart from the classic that came before it. For starters, the biggest change visually with Streets of Rage 2 is the fact that it features much bigger sprites, bolder backgrounds, and even some diagonal scrolling being included in the opening stage to really separate it stylistically from what came before it. As for impact on the beat 'em up genre overall, many have made a case that the original Streets of Rage game for the Mega Drive featured more impressive gameplay than what could even be found in the original Final Fight arcade game. However, while this was the case, it was very hard to dispute that Final Fight didn't still hold the graphical edge out of the 2 early games, with the Capcom title featuring bigger and more impressive sprites. As cut and dry as this seemingly was, Streets of Rage 2 rectified its previous inferiorities by offering up an experience that looked arguably even prettier than Capcom's classic game. Streets of Rage 2 was every bit as beautiful as coin-operated video games from the same genre, which was unprecedented at the time. Speaking of this game's beauty, none of this would have been possible if it were not for a woman known as Ayano Koshiro, the sister of Yuzo Koshiro, who came up with the character's special moves and attacks. In the past, she has mentioned that while the first Streets of Rage game was heavily inspired by Final Fight, Streets of Rage 2 was inspired by a newer and even more successful Capcom game. I am of course referring to one of the most important arcade games ever made, Street Fighter 2. Regarding this, Ayano has stated in the past that there was also a certain flow to the fighting that we wanted. I am sure you played Street Fighter 2, my brother and I did too. We liked it so much we bought a cabinet and had it installed in the office at Ancient. My brother and I liked the way they thought in Street Fighter 2, and between the two of us a shared vision of the fighting of Streets of Rage 2 arose. 2 jabs followed by a straight punch. There's some heavy hits and the enemy goes flying. That kind of flow had to be in there. Taking influence from Chun-Li and company, the team would ensure that the fighting in Streets of Rage 2 was more refined than in any beat 'em up that had preceded it. In relation to this beloved game's combat, Ayano has also explained previously why Streets of Rage 2 features a different playable lineup of fighters than what can be found in the previous game. Those who have played this game will be more than aware that Axel and Blaze remain, but as briefly touched on earlier, Adam was removed. In the game's plot, his kidnapping serves as an excuse for him no longer being a playable character. However, in reality, a more pertinent reason exists for his exclusion. According to Ayano, the team at Ancient felt that Adam didn't really bring anything different to the table that Axel didn't bring to the game already. So, to introduce more gameplay diversity, the decision was made to cut Adam. Ayano saw characters in Streets of Rage 2 being even more important than with the previous game, as now the character sprites were much more impressive and much bigger. Since they included much more detail than before, Ayano wanted each of them to have more varied attacks and movements. So, taking out Adam and introducing 2 further characters was just a quick and practical way of achieving this feat. As for the 2 new individuals that were brought to the table, we first have Skate, a character who is positioned as Adam's younger brother, giving him story importance beyond just his gameplay. Skate was designed to be a super maneuverable character with a tricky style that requires some skill, made with experienced beat-em-up players in mind. The other new character is of course the pro wrestler known as Max, who I guess is Streets of Rage's answer to Hagar. Max obviously has a power style and was partly created due to Ayano's brother Yuzo adoring throw-based characters. With access to this famous foursome, Ayano believes the roster is well balanced and gives players a choice between using 2 very standard characters and 2 quirky new ones. Once again, considering how much so many people love this game, who could disagree with her? Speaking of the characters in Streets of Rage 2 and the game's combat inspired by Street Fighter 2, the characters each have their own unique blitz attacks, a function which allows players to deal colossal amounts of damage with a single hit. Building on mechanical additions, they can also execute what are known as breakout moves. These are used to break holds and allow players to damage enemies from both in front of and behind opponents. Players must use blitz and breakout moves strategically though, as using them decreases the character's life bar, a mechanic that seems to have been plucked right from Final Fight. Also mirroring Street Fighter 2, each character has their own unique moves. For example, Axel can execute a grand uppercut. These unique moves do substantial damage and differ from blitz attacks as they do not deplete the player's own life bar. In terms of the game's stage design, right from the opening level the influence from the previous game is unmistakable. Yet everything now looks bolder, brighter and more beautiful than ever before. The designers have pushed the boundaries, creating a visual feast that captures the player's imagination instantly. One standout feature is the dynamic diagonal scrolling that we mentioned earlier. This signals to the player that while this game might feel familiar, it's an entirely new and even more impressive adventure. As you progress, you soon find yourself brawling through a lively bar area, an exciting nod to the iconic final fight absent in the original Streets of Rage. This thrilling addition sets the stage for what's to come, and by the second stage you're crossing a bridge against a stunning nighttime city backdrop, evoking memories of both Streets of Rage and Final Fight. But just as nostalgia kicks in, brand new mechanics take the stage. Motorcycle riders and fresh enemy types burst onto the scene, introducing elements never before seen in the genre. In the unfolding adventure that this sequel delivers, Stage 1 and 2 firmly establish a fresh aesthetic, showcasing to players that they're embarking on a revitalised journey. But it's Stage 3 where the adventure truly diversifies, plunging you into a dazzling theme park offering up a backdrop unlike anything seen in the predecessor. Here the excitement reaches new heights as your characters find themselves battling on a pirate ship, adding an unexpected twist to the brawling action. Then comes Stage 4, where the developers venture into even more experimental territory, with an alien theme level. Ayano Koshiro provides fascinating insight into this stage, revealing the biggest influence on that stage progression was probably the Contra series. Each stage in Contra feels like a distinct world, given a sense of backstory without words. I think you get a sense of it just from the stage progression. Koshiro also shares a personal touch, noting Streets of Rage 2 is filled with things that my friends and I loved. Do you remember their enemy Jack with a knife? His palette swap is called Bino. These names came from a soybean candy we all adored. Stage 5 seamlessly integrates the theme park from Stage 3 as a scenic backdrop, setting the scene for an intense descent down a lift, a classic beat 'em up trope. As I always point out, it seems illegal to exclude this setting from a game in the genre. At the bottom, the stage culminates with an underground boss encounter. Stage 6 ramps up the excitement aboard a moving boat, a nostalgic nod to the first Streets of Rage game, which itself drew inspiration from Final Fight's moving train stage. This dynamic level, with ground moving beneath players and the scenery scrolling in the background, has become a hallmark of the genre, adding more layers of immersion and thrill to the gameplay. The journey intensifies in the next stage, starting on a beautiful beach, where players begin their fight down a road that progressively transforms into a war-torn battlefield. The cracked concrete, barbed wire fences, and sandbag barricades tell a vivid story of escalating conflict. Hordes of bikers and enemies confront the player, enhancing the sense of approaching an epic showdown. This level design masterfully conveys the narrative, much like Ayano Koshiro described with the Contra series. You can feel the tension rising as you cross the sea, land on the beach, and face increasing obstacles on your path to the boss's keep. In Stage 7, the game embraces the classic factory-style level, complete with conveyor belts, robots, and more lifts, staples of a genre that fans eagerly anticipate. The player's upward progression culminates in Stage 8, reaching the top of a towering structure where the final boss encounter awaits. The last level is a relentless gauntlet, a fitting final frontier that throws everything at the player, leading to the ultimate showdown with Mr. X. This climactic battle encapsulates the thrill and challenge that defines Streets of Rage 2, promising an unforgettable conclusion to this epic journey. What a game this one is. Something else worth noting is that throughout one's adventure, you might notice that enemy sprites in Streets of Rage 2 are crafted with the same meticulous detail as the playable fighters, a testament to the intense scrutiny during production. Ayano Koshiro of Ancient revealed the challenges she faced in this process, expressing frustration over the quality of outsourced enemy pixel art. She remarked, "This was down to the quality of the enemy pixel art we got back from the people we outsourced that work to. I had to have them redraw it so many times. Somehow what I was saying just wasn't getting through to them. In the end I had to do it myself. I retouched a lot of the backgrounds myself too, but I will say that the backgrounds done by Nakai Satoshi were amazing. Stuff like the area where you're inside the ship, the atmosphere of the pipes, and the rust. I was amazed at what he pulled off with such a limited colour palette." The diverse and intricately designed enemies combined with a stunning stage backdrops are just a few elements that make Streets of Rage 2 extraordinary. The dedicated team at Ancient played a crucial role in these achievements. Each level features a variety of enemies and culminates in unique boss encounters with distinct attack patterns, enhancing the game's challenge and strategic depth. Every pulse-pounding moment and stunning piece of artwork in Streets of Rage 2 is elevated by what many consider to be one of the greatest in-game soundtracks of all time. The majority of the game's composition, as mentioned earlier, was crafted by Yuzo Koshiro, hailed by Nintendo Power as arguably the greatest game music composer of the 16-bit era. The soundtrack of Streets of Rage 2 was ahead of its time, blending swaggering house synths, gritty electro funk, and early trance elements to create an unforgettable auditory experience. Added to this musical masterpiece, we have the 3 exceptional tracks composed by Motohiro Kawashima, a renowned Japanese video game composer and techno producer who later contributed to Streets of Rage 3 as well. The collaboration between Koshiro and Kawashima resulted in a soundtrack that not only complements the game's intense action, but also stands on its own as a groundbreaking achievement in video game music history. Few soundtracks in video games' long existence are as celebrated as that of Streets of Rage. When Streets of Rage 2 hit the shelves in December of 1992, it was met with widespread critical acclaim, instantly cementing its legacy in gaming history. GamePro awarded it a perfect score of 5 out of 5, stating that Streets of Rage 2 not only stood toe-to-toe with heavyweights like Final Fight and Super Double Dragon, but also established itself as a side-scrolling equivalent of Street Fighter 2 in the beat-em-up genre. Fans echoed this sentiment, giving the game an astounding 97% rating and lauding it as the best fighting and side-scrolling fighter game they had ever played. Praise flowed for its gameplay, graphics, sound effects and music, culminating in the consensus that it was the best beat-em-up sequel of 1992. Sega Force reviewers bestowed a 95% score, declaring it the best beat-em-up on any console and the greatest boon to Mega Drive owners since the advent of a certain Blue Hedgehog. Mean Machine Sega chimed in with a 90% score, with one reviewer calling it a truly arcade quality beat-em-up that outshone any Neo Geo contender. They even suggested that non-fans of the genre should buy it, predicting that the game would convert them. Beyond the game's technical excellence, its soundtrack received such acclaim that Yuzo Koshiro, the composer, was invited to DJ the tracks in nightclubs, further solidifying Streets of Rage 2's impact on both gaming and music culture, and a move which was pretty much unprecedented in gaming before this release. Taking into account everything we have explored and examined in this video, it becomes abundantly clear why so many consider Streets of Rage 2 to be the pinnacle of Sega's gaming legacy. Widely regarded as the Mega Drive's finest hour, Streets of Rage 2 offered an unparalleled experience. While games like Sonic 3 provided great fun and variety, they still faced stiff competition from platforming giants like Super Mario World and Super Mario Bros. 3. Streets of Rage 2, however, stands in a league of its own. It's hard to argue that any beat-em-up on the Super Nintendo even approaches the level of greatness achieved by Streets of Rage 2. Upon its release, the game had no equal in the home gaming market, and continues to hold its ground against arcade beat-em-ups even today. The game's quality and impact are undeniable. Outside of the Sonic series, no 16-bit era Sega franchise or title has reached the same cultural significance as Streets of Rage. What sets Streets of Rage 2 apart from even Sonic is that it was never surpassed by any of its contemporaries. For this reason, I, along with countless other Sega fans, firmly believe that Streets of Rage 2 is the greatest Sega game ever made, a timeless classic that remains unmatched to this day. Anyway, if you enjoyed this retrospective on this epic game, I have episodes covering both Streets of Rage 3 and 4 for you, which you can watch right now. But if you want to purchase some new games to call your own, don't forget you can get up to 90% off and support my work simultaneously by using my affiliate link. Happy shopping. Cheerio.